For my persuasive speech, I'm going to talk about how important it is to support local businesses and small businesses during the pandemic that we are going through right now. I decided to do my speech on small businesses and compare it to larger businesses just because I actually work for a small business and I have seen how hard we suffer, and it's made me realize that it is really important to support the smaller businesses rather than the larger ones. So Harvard Business did a study and they talk about small businesses, and they make up 58.9 million employed people. So it's 47.5% of the private sector. And during the pandemic, we have the option to apply for an SBA loan. An SBA loan is a small business loan, and it is to help us get through this hard time. But it is also difficult because you have to employ people while you have this loan, and it can only go to your payroll, so your regular bills and everything else. And it's also difficult for small businesses to keep people on right now because unemployment, they are making such good money because of the extra $600 you get per week, that especially in the state of Montana where I live, the minimum wage is $8.65. And so if you work 40 hours a week, you're still not making very good money, and you're definitely not making anything close to, $800 because of the $200 typically people receive on unemployment, and then that $600 on top of it. So it's hard for us to keep people employed during this time. Now, Montana is back to normal already. Well, we're in phase 2, so it's more back to normal than Washington. So we have half of our restaurants open, but a lot of the corporate restaurants have stayed closed, and that's because they don't suffer as much as the small business restaurants, where they need to open because they don't have the money and the support as the corporate, so they can't stay closed for a long time because they can't afford it. We've also actually already had restaurants close in Bozeman because they have had to file for bankruptcy because they just simply can't afford to be closed. I also saw in Tri-Cities that Cousins has permanently closed, and I also worked for a restaurant here called Bob's Burgers, and I know that they're suffering really bad just because we can only do takeout, and a lot of people would rather go to Red Robin or places like that, but we need to raise awareness that those restaurants don't suffer the way that small business restaurants do, just because they don't have the funds. And so large businesses employ about 51% of the U.S., and they made over 1.4 trillion sales last year, which small businesses wasn't even close to that. And I know a lot of this just because like I said, I work for a small business. I am a payroll clerk, so I work for 13 restaurants and I do all of their payroll. So during this time, my boss actually called me an SBA loan filler-outer, which means that I am in charge of filling out the SBA loan. And this was something when coronavirus first started happening. Montana wasn't really badly affected, and it wasn't even in the end compared to Washington. We only had about 500 cases, maybe a little bit under, and so we were able to open early, and we were only in our stay-at-home order, I think only for 3 or 4 weeks, so it wasn't as bad. But when it first happened, my boss was like, this is what you're gonna have to do, you need to get this loan. Well, due to us having 13 restaurants, we had to go through 3 different banks because we use 3 different banks for all of our restaurants, and so I had to work on getting those loans filled out, and it's really hard looking at our sales compared to last year, where 13 restaurants last year were making around $170,000 a night, and with only takeout we're making $30,000 a night. And most people don't look at small businesses as a place to go to eat. They rather would go to the big places instead of like the little mom and pop shops, and it's hard for us to get our name out there. And so that's why me advertising on Facebook and many other sites, hey, come to a restaurant, we're offering to-go alcohol and stuff like that to get them to come, because we're trying to raise awareness that we cannot support ourselves during this time, and we need the support of our community. There's another restaurant, for example, it's called Old Chicago. They're open now in Montana, but it's a larger corporate restaurant, and they closed during the whole time of coronavirus because they didn't need the money and they didn't want to endanger their employees, which is great. But the problem is that we suffer from is we don't want to endanger our employees, and we want to keep it as clean as possible for them, but we also have to make money, so we have to do it in the safest way, and that's, wearing gloves and making sure everything's wiped down. We're keeping everything very clean, and we only have a few employees, which it also sucks as a small business to have to lay off all those people. So, you know, we laid off over 900 people, where larger businesses laid off more people or furloughed people, but they still are not suffering as much.